United States Army presents The Big Picture.
The big picture in 1941 was one of urgency. The Army needed trained leaders fast, lots of them trained in the disciplines of combat.
Get the chest up in the air. Get it up.
And thousands of men swelled their chests proudly, choosing to serve as officers. At the direction of the U.S. War Department, men and women in the United States Army began their training to be commissioned new officers through the Officer Candidate Program. It was Army Chief of Staff General George Marshall's vision to establish a rigorous training program. And the first OCS class began in July 1941 at Fort Benning, Georgia. Hello, everyone. I'm Don Dare, an OCS graduate from Fort Benning in September of 1969. Of the graduates from that first OCS class in September 1941, many would go on to be the leading sources of commissioned officers during World War II. Of the 800,000 or so officers who served in the Army during World War II, records show more than half were OCS graduates, and well over half of the combat leaders were products of the officer training schools. Those famed 90-day wonders would provide leaders for the rapidly expanding Army of more than 8 million soldiers by late 1945. After the war, many would lead distinguished careers. From 1946 through 1965, the OCS program ebbed and flowed, depending on the Army's needs, which picked up in the early 1950s.
Korea. You could call this the proving ground of the infantry school.
The officer requirements of the Korean War reactivated 6 OCS schools, and by the end of 1952, close to 17,000 candidates had graduated from those schools. However, all reactivated schools except artillery, engineer, and infantry were closed by the end of 1952, and the engineer OCS classes would close 2 years later.
Combat today is more complex.
Then came Vietnam.
Sir, candidate Sparks, request mission to enter. I can't hear you.
As the Army rapidly expanded, so would the need for junior officers. So OCS cranked up again as the need to produce trained officers soared. 6 new schools were added to 2 already in existence. In fact, the majority of the junior combat leaders in Vietnam were citizen soldiers turned combat leaders. During the height of the Vietnam conflict, it's estimated that more than 50% of the company-grade officers who fought in Vietnam were OCS graduates. But changes were ahead. In April 1973, the Branch Immaterial Officer Candidate course was created at Fort Benning to replace all other courses. Then in 1976, with the end of the gender-separate Army, the Women's Army Corps OCS program at Fort McClellan, Alabama, merged with the course at Fort Benning. Since that time, OCS has continued to provide well-trained junior commissioned officers to the total force for all basic branches of the Army. Today, all Army OCS is consolidated at Fort Benning. Upon graduation within 12 weeks, the young officers attend their respective branch schools. Our numbers are big, and there is an active OCS association that continues to encourage candidates enrolled in the program and supports them once they're commissioned. Often, some of the better-known former candidates visit soon-to-be second lieutenants. Long before Bob Dole was a U.S. Senator, long before he was a presidential candidate, he was an OCS candidate at Fort Benning. In 1944, Bob Dole was commissioned a second lieutenant just before being sent to Italy to fight in World War II. Everyone appreciated his visit to the battalion. In the OCS battalion area at Fort Benning is the Memorial Walk. It's lined with bricks and pavers honoring the history and heritage of OCS graduates, past and present. I had the opportunity to visit Fort Benning in 2017. In my role as a news reporter, I couldn't go there without filing a report. Here is my story as it appeared on WATE TV in Knoxville, Tennessee. The Army's Officer Candidate School is about learning leadership. For 75 years, young men and women have been put to the test in this training. At Fort Benning, Georgia, OCS challenges candidates to make sure they have agile and adaptive leadership capabilities.
Alpha Team, Bravo Team, get on line!
When candidates successfully complete their training and assume command of a platoon, the whole equation changes. In the modern Army, they're taught to be critical thinkers, capable of executing a command with minimal guidance. To be successful to graduate from this rigorous program, a candidate's value system has to be straight and narrow.
Most of all, we want them to be of absolutely strong moral character. What the demands of combat today and the fact that these candidates, within 6 months of graduating OCS, will be leading soldiers deployed to Iraq, Afghanistan, or Syria, they absolutely have to be the moral compass for the platoons that they're leading.
A group of us, all former candidates who later became Army officers, got to meet and talk with men and women who will represent about 1/3 of the second lieutenants commissioned into the Army. Today's officer candidates first attend basic training for 10 weeks before beginning 12 weeks of OCS. Upon graduating, the newly commissioned officers do branch training at 16 different Army schools around the country.
So many places in the civilian world, you don't have the opportunity to be a leader. You're constantly a follower. So I wanted the opportunity to get that experience.
All candidates are required to be college graduates. Marcus Ussery says the training has changed him.
Everything from how to be an effective leader to better understanding myself and keeping strong self-discipline, sir.
Today, the Army's growing need.
The OCS of 50 years ago commissioned thousands of officers every year. As the Vietnam War grew, 40 to 50,000 new officers were needed, but ROTC and West Point produced less and less. 6 new schools were added back then as the demand for junior officers increased. The training in today's modern Army is different. It's computerized. Weeks are spent indoors, honing skills by using a computer-fired weapon, which tells you immediately whether you hit your target or not. The idea is to improve accuracy here before you go into the field.
You know, the old days, when I came through, when you came through, it was the drill sergeant looking at you. And now it's the computer tells you if you're tilting the weapon too far to the left or if you're not getting a good sight.
Medal of Honor recipient Charles Kettles is an OCS graduate. When the program began in World War II, the need for commissioned officers was intense, as 2 theaters of war were being fought and there was little room for undisciplined officers. Colonel Kettles says today's OCS candidates receive training never imagined by those who came before.
They're capable. They're even better trained, I'm sure. But I'm fully confident they can pick up the ball and run.
One thing that hasn't changed, push-ups. But one thing that will change, the number of candidates coming through the program next year. It will double.
In our 75-year history, we are the Army's mechanism to rapidly grow the officer population.
The challenges of OCS are difficult, but the ultimate reward of serving your country can't be measured. The legacy of OCS is being maintained by the nonprofit United States Army Officer Candidate School Alumni Association. It represents all Army officers commissioned through OCS, regardless of previous school locations and branches. As a member, our mission is to serve and honor the OCS program and its graduates, and to further the ideal and promote the welfare of OCS, the Officer Corps, and the United States Army. You can join us by going online to www.ocsalumni.org. Also, find out about the Memorial Walk, how you can honor someone who made you into a leader. Remember the OCS motto, standards, no compromise. It was the motto in 1941 and still is today. I'm Don Dare. Thank you for watching.